Hello, everyone, and welcome to another round of PDN Live. I'm Shannon, your moderator, and with me tonight we have Rob Pincus, the Executive Director of Personal Defense Network, and we have a special guest tonight, Robert Leatham. He's a professional shooter and a USPSA national champion. Tonight's topic will be pretty interesting. It's developing defensive shooting skills. And Rob, can you kind of, I've been reading on the internet today that's kind of like a theme of when worlds collide. So can you kind of explain what that means?
Yeah, I think that honestly, Rob and I have known each other for a while, and we've interacted, we've done some stuff together. We recently did a whole series of videos that are going to be released at the Springfield Armory website, and they're going to be able to be seen at the PDN website. The fact is that I think the perception, probably, hopefully from a lot of the viewers, is, wow, here's this competitive shooter guy and real technical marksmanship guy, and then over here, here's this, Rob doesn't care about group size, defensive shooter, it's all context, it's all application guy, and that's worlds colliding. I think probably we have a lot more in common than we have in difference, and it's where those disagreements are that maybe people will find the most interest. But as far as defensive shooting goes, I think that we're very much on the same page, more on the same page than a lot of people think. So it's interesting. The worlds colliding thing was our theme in this whole project, but at the same time, it may be much more like merging, or there's a lot more synergy than I think people think. I don't know.
And Robert, why don't you come on and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into what you do, and also plug any sort of websites or social media handles while you're here.
Well, I've kind of been the opposite side of where Pincus is all these years. How I got into this and where we met is basically being professionals in the same, let's call it industry, but not necessarily the same market. I come from the competition side where everything's about the score and everything's about the perfection of the technique, working in a very ritualized and organized manner, which is what a competition shooter does, is try and make everything perfect. We get to practice the same thing over and over and over, like developing dance steps. But as my shooting career developed and I got more involved in it, I started getting a lot of requests to do training for groups that were interested in developing their shooting skills. And the perception, like Rob said, is that we're very, very different. And the reality is, it isn't as different as even I thought it was. When we did those segments, Rob, I realized that what you and I were doing out there, if I was looking for differences in us, there was much less of that than there was similarities. Whereas everything I do, I consider to start at the moment the decision has been made to shoot. So everything is marksmanship from that standpoint. But a lot of it's still just common sense and what techniques you're trying to teach yourself to do, because the traditional methods of marksmanship training I find virtually useless, not only for competition but also for a self-defense and tactical use from my standpoint. And what became interesting over the years is just for me to realize that once the decision to pull the trigger has been made, there's really no difference between whether you're shooting at a paper target or anything else, but it's getting to that point where the real differences between Rob and I are.
It'll be interesting to hear those a little bit more as we go on. I think right out of the gate, before I get into my questions, Rob, tell us what you're up to. What you're doing and where you're at.
Other than right now trying to update social media to say, hey, we're live, come see us. Other than that, since you're already watching, if you're listening to me right now, you don't need that update. So we just launched the tour. So I'm on the 2016 Personal Defense Network training tour. I'm down at my home range at St. Augustine, the ancient city shooting range. I'm actually over at the owner's house right now, hanging out and doing this live broadcast. He had the best Wi-Fi in the area. So this is the Eastern headquarters. I've been really taking a lot of downtime the last 8 months with my daughter, baby Pincus, being born late June as the tour ended last year. I haven't been traveling much. So just the last week, I've been getting back into travel mode. Today was day 5 of 6 training on the range. We taped a bunch of new video for PDN down here at Ancient City last week, including all the new tour launch videos, which will be hitting soon. We've got some great sponsors. Springfield Armory is one of them. Obviously, Leatham's worked with. We're gonna skip the Rob. We're just gonna go with last names, just not to be informal.
I know this is gonna get confusing.
So Leatham has been working with Springfield Army for a long time, obviously, and while you usually see the single action guns in his hands, you see the XD in my hands. It's great to have them as a tour sponsor, and that's really Springfield brought us together. So the tour does a lot of great things, including getting us together tonight to talk about defensive shooting skill development. So it's a busy time of year for me. I know Latham's getting ready to start his big season of competition, so everybody's busy. It's the spring. There's a lot of people coming out to training. If people are interested in training with me or any of the other contributing instructors, go to personaldefensenetwork.com, click on the training tab, and take a look at the calendar for all the dates and locations of the 2016 training tour classes. We have medical classes, unarmed classes, knife classes, obviously a lot of defensive shooting classes. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot of great instructors out on the tour. And it's just getting started. So we had, I think, classes in 4 different states this past weekend, and it's going to hit about 30 states this year. So take a look at the training calendar, see if you can join us. There's still plenty of opportunities to train with us in 2016.
Awesome. And are you going to be periscoping while you're on the road too, and doing Instagram and all that good stuff?
You know, I'm like, Periscope is my nemesis. Like, we are going to be doing some, I swear. If you join the Personal Defense Network, the Periscope, we are going to be doing some. I'm doing a lot of Facebook mentions through the Rob Pincus Pro, so facebook.com/Rob Pincus Pro. I'm doing a lot of live videos. We've done like 3 or 4 in the last week, and I'll continue to do that. Periscope is perishable, and the Facebook mentions last forever, but we reshare all that. So a lot of the stuff we're doing from the tour will also be shared through the Personal Defense Network, Facebook, and other social media. But yeah, keep an eye on that Periscope. We'll probably start doing that maybe tomorrow. How about that? I'll commit now. Live on Google Hangouts, broadcast to the world. I will do a Periscope through the PDN channel tomorrow.
Wow, you all heard it from him. Leatham, before we get started, do you have any social handles or websites that you want people to come find you at?
Well, I have my own website, roblatham.com. Of course, I work for Springfield Armory, so the big one I want to mention there is springfield-armory.com, and Safariland is also a huge supporter for me. Those are the ones I hit. I actually try to do as little work as possible. That's kind of the sign of a professional shooter. And my wife, who you met earlier, truly handles all of the real work associated things. So she's taking the dog for a walk as to not interrupt this discussion, but
well, we'll jump right in. And this question was asked a lot, so I figured we'd start off the discussion with this question. So, Leatham, I'd like you to answer first, but the question, nonetheless, is it more useful to train and compete in, say, IPSC or IDPA than going and taking a defensive training class?
They're completely different things. Always consider, I never consider shooting in an organized event as actual training. I consider it a test. So for me in my own shooting, there's always the training range, which I shoot 1,000 rounds training for every round I ever fire in a match. The match I see as an opportunity to test your skills under, moderate, a low level of stress. It can't possibly be that important because there's no live or die in it. But I use it as a testing ground to find out where my skills are at, where I'm lacking, what I need improvement in. And that just basically is the basis for when I take my training program. So I don't consider anything you do at a match as an indicator of how you might perform in a different environment. It's just how well you perform in that, but it's not it's a guideline for how we take it to the training range, but nothing more than that.
Rob, what are your thoughts on which one? Is there more value in competitive shooting or taking a class when it comes to defensive shooting skills?
Well, obviously I'm on the side of taking a class. I think the important thing for me, and just kind of get this out of the way, the thing that you see thrown out on the internet all the time is that those of us on the defensive training side will throw out, well, that will get you killed on the street, right? Like that's the hashtag, that's the cliche. And at the extreme, where that becomes real and where that whole kind of cliche comes from our side, I think, is that there are definitely gear choices and in some cases technique choices that people will make to get a better score in the competition area that aren't what people, I believe, should choose in terms of gear or technique choices when they're preparing for a defensive worst-case scenario, counter ambush, caught off guard, you need to defend yourself and your family moment. So if people focus on competition as somehow equal to their defensive shooting skill, I think that's where they potentially get distracted. There are some great testing opportunities, as Leatham pointed out. There's testing opportunities that come from competition. People tell me, well, I can't draw from my holster, I can't move, I can't engage multiple targets, I can't shoot fast on my local ranges unless I join IDPA. Okay, cool, join IDPA, but if you're coming in first, if you're coming in second, if you're coming in the top 20%, you're probably playing the game more than you're actually practicing or using it as a practical test. And I think that's the important distinction to me. If you want to use it as a test, great. Test what you should be doing in that defensive moment. Don't try to win.
Right. Let me jump in on that one because I agree with you completely, Rob. And one of the things and mistakes I see constantly is that a shooter will go out there and do well in a match and believe that, matter of fact, I know a lot of people who teach and instruct based solely on their ability. And the two things are just completely different. If you're asking me which is more important, a performance in a match or taking a class, I have to ask the question is how good are you? If you're taking, like if you come to me and you are taking a skills class and you're already a top level competition shooter, let's just, whatever that is, the chances of me teaching you skills that will dramatically change your ability to perform in a stressful situation may or may not be valid, and I may or may not be able to do that. But whether or not you're going to gain more from learning something in an area you're not familiar with, you're not skilled, or going and shooting a match, there's no question. You should learn the skills and learn how to use what it is that's important to you. The same as, I know a lot of people who are, I call them gym rats. Rob, I don't know what you call them, but they're people who spend a lot of time on the range and they train in their own inbred kind of ways and don't ever get outside of it, and they develop these techniques and skills and even, I don't know, the processes with which they train, and then they walk away thinking they're badasses. And in the reality is they might have a modicum of skill, but I've never seen that they can use it in a or I should say a stressful environment. And short of being in a fight, a match is a good way of testing your ability to perform in pressure, but just like you said, equipment-wise. Rob, you see the stuff we shoot in competition. I give up any and all reality in the equipment and the technique if I can gain one fraction of a second, fraction of a point. I mean, I'll just put that out there straight right off the top, is it's all about getting the score. So you have to have several sides of this. And if your focus is truly aside from practical skills and defensive, you don't want to come to one of my classes where I'm teaching high-end competition, because do you really care if you can make a headshot at 35 yards with a $4,500 gun with a 1-pound trigger on it? No, it's ludicrous, because that's not the piece of equipment you would have. So you make some very valid points there. And I think it's important that anybody watching this recognizes that I don't think anybody, they all perceive, that I carry around a $3,000 tuned competition gun as my carry gun. That's not true at all. I have the same concerns about trigger weight and concealment, which I learned a lot from you about when we did those segments. That was an eye opener for me, Rob. And I mean, it's just, like I say, it's this whole clash of concepts. So when you ask, should you take a class? Well, what are you trying to learn? Would I recommend somebody that's interested in learning how to fight come to a competition class? Yeah. Somebody want to learn how to shoot and enhance their skills? Yes. But it's a different. Once again, I start breaking it down into maybe too many details, but that's where.
So we have live questions come in. And by the way, those of you that are watching live, if you do have questions, we do have a chat box or comment box where you can put the questions in, and we'll try to get to them. But one of the recurring question is, okay, so someone does want to be, defensive shooting skill mindset, but they also want to compete. So are there certain matches that would be better suited for that, whether it's IPSC or USPSA? Are there any is there a hybrid where someone wants to be that defensive shooter but also compete as well? Like, is there a specific match that they should be drawn to?
What you mean, as in well, from the standpoint of a shooting, to me, it's all competition shooting. It's all combat shooting. Any of them where it's a dance, where I get to go look and see what's going on before it happens, is an organized competition. Okay, so if you look at it from the standpoint, IDPA, those guys are always, and I'm one of them. So when I say those guys, I'm one of all of those guys. The IDPA side is always like we're testing more practical equipment. That's true, because their equipment rules are more sensible than USPSA or IPSC rules are from the standpoint of a defensive shooter, because that's the gun and equipment you're more likely to have. So that's a more realistic testing process from the standpoint of equipment. The events for IDPA are much easier, and I guess from the standpoint of easy, I mean the round counts are lower, the difficulty of the shots are probably not quite as high, but they put a premium on some elements like use of concealment that is probably more interesting to the defensive shooter. The competition, an IPSC shooter show up at the match and good God, you could shoot anything from 5-shot stage to no shoot targets on a mover at 35 or 40 yards that you would never ever even consider taking that shot in reality, because there's no way to guarantee you can do it. But for from the standpoint of the game, they want to make the test extremely hard. So I would say IDPA much more realistic. IPSC, USPSA, that kind of shooting, way less realistic, way more difficult, maybe more entertaining. Is that a reasonable answer to that?
Yes. Rob, do you have any experience with shooting matches at all? Just out of curiosity.
Way back. I think the last time I shot in anything other than like a side match or some of the stuff at some of the tactical training conferences that have some charity matches and things like that, I did IDPA in the late 90s. Never got beyond like the state match in Tennessee as far as competitiveness. It's when I go do a charity match or a side match now at a tactical conference, I'll try to shoot it as realistically as possible, and I'll go out of my way to do it, almost like a caricature of what we would train people to do. So that I remember a match a few years ago where I was shooting it with it was a revolver. It was like me and Masad Ayub and maybe Claude Werner, Marty Hayes, a bunch of guys said, okay, we're going to shoot the whole thing with snub-nosed revolvers. And there was a thing where you had to shoot from behind a car. Well, I teach people to get down behind the front tire and shoot around the fender or under the car. So I'm literally like feet on the tire, rolling out towards the front of the car, shooting on this target. The target wasn't, you were really high berms, the ones at U.S. Shooting Academy in USSA in Tulsa. Great berms, one of the best berms in America. And so they're really high, so I'm shooting up, and the target just wasn't going to fall. Because the way the target was set up, you had to drive into the chest. Well, shooting into the chest at the angle I was shooting at, I wasn't hitting the piece of steel at the back of the 3D target. So I probably shot 20 rounds sitting under that car into the chest of this target. It just wasn't going to go down. But that's where I would teach people to go, and that was the angle that the target presented itself at. And the next guy got up and literally put his elbows on top of the hood of the truck, leaned over and fired 2 rounds and dropped the target. But that's not how any of us that are tactical defensive instructors would teach people to shoot it. So that's sort of my take on it, is if I'm going to do it, I want to do it as practice. I want to do it legitimately. I never put the time, effort, and energy in, nor did I really probably have the raw material and skills to be a world-class shooter. So maybe that's why I gravitated towards the defensive training side. I don't know, but it's fair to say that, yes, in the 90s I dabbled, IPSC and IDPA, never really took, and nowadays I do it for charity, I do it for fun, I do it to set an example, but no, I haven't competed seriously for a long time.
So, Pincus, what do you see? So, what do you see then as the most important skill to develop to shoot fast and accurately in a defensive shooting scenario?
I'm all about applicable skills. So for me, fast and accurate is relative. So from as Leatham was just saying, like you can call headshots at 35 yards accurate, for sure, but that level of precision. So I consider accuracy a yes or no proposition. You define a target, high center chest at 10 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, and if you hit it, you hit it. I don't care if you hit the edge of it, I don't care if you hit the center of it, it's yes or no proposition. the level of precision that's required in defensive shooting is generally very low. When you talk about a world-class shooter, they're not going to be challenged by the level of precision that's required to be accurate in a defensive context 99% of the time. Can you prepare for that situation? It's an incredible anomaly out at the edge of possibility. Yeah, I guess, but I don't think that's where most people, not most people that are watching PDN, not most people that are buying my DVDs, not most people that are coming to my classes, they need to be worried about body shots at 20 yards maybe as a max, you know, across the street, down the hallway, whatever. You start talking about headshots at 30 yards and, you know, that's what I would consider unreasonable distance or extreme precision from a defensive shooting context. So fast, that's the accuracy answer. As far as what is fast, we had a woman in her 70s in class over the weekend shooting a gun that fit her hand pretty well, but she's got some arthritis, she's got some issues, she has relatively small hands. We tried a whole bunch of guns. It ended up the XDS was the closest that fit her hand well. The XD Mod 2 did okay. She showed up with an H&K VP9, which is kind of very similar to the Mod 2s, honestly, from the XD in terms of size and the way it fits her hand. She could shoot really well. She was actually, if you looked at her target from a marksmanship standpoint, it was great, but she shot slow. Well, arthritis, hand strength, upper body strength, neuromuscular issues with advanced age. She shot slow relative to everybody else in the class, but she shot well. And what I'm worried about is where was she relative to her potential? You know, if she'd have shown up with a 40, with an H&K USP or a Glock or one of the other boxy guns with a 357 SIG or a 40, she would have been worse off. So getting a gun that fits her hand, getting the 9mm with a round that's going to meet our minimum standards for defensive use, and getting her to shoot that as quickly as is appropriate for her raw material potential, that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in comparing her to some guy on some choreographed timer drill on the YouTubes. Like, it's all made up. It doesn't matter to me. And that's where I think people chasing tenths or you know, people chasing hundreds on a timer drill to post the best time on YouTube, they just drive me nuts, because that's not what it should be about. I don't believe.
So, Leatham, what does speed and accuracy mean to you from a defensive shooting perspective? We've talked about the competitive side, so I guess the flip side of that question for you.
Well, that's an easy answer. A buddy of mine named Larry Vickers always liked to say when he did a class, I did a couple classes with him, he said that accuracy or speed is fine, but accuracy is final, which is, you know, I think some sort of probably variation of what somebody else said. My response to that is accuracy is fine if it's delivered in time. Because if you're not fast enough, then it may not matter how good a top shot you are, it might just be potential skill that will never be realized, good or bad, become the outcome. So just like Rob, from the standpoint of what is acceptable accuracy, is you have to determine what the hit has to be. Competition, we're trying to get the most points in the least amount of time. In a real world shooting situation, in defensive skills, first off, I've checked it. In my house, I think the longest shot that could occur in my house is, I think, 9 yards. As I remember, Rob, I checked this one day because we had an argument with somebody, and it would literally be from down that hallway, from the front door to the back door. And we're in a defensive shooting situation, that shot would never happen anyway, because I wouldn't be standing out in the open waiting to have a gunfight with somebody. That would be just stupid. I'd rather move. And so from the standpoint of what the speed and accuracy quotient comes in, I agree with you completely. We determine what an acceptable hit is, and it's always the best one you can get, but I think right here is no better than right here, and right there is no better than right there. If this takes 10 seconds and that takes 2 seconds, because one, the chance of you requiring that kind of precision or getting to use it in a dynamic environment, I think is very unlikely. And so it's easy to from the standpoint of just speed and accuracy, overemphasizing one or the other. And I think you need enough, how would I say this? You need enough accuracy in the least amount of time. So you want to shoot as fast as you can and get the minimum amount of accuracy required. You could also back it up. You need the most amount of accuracy in the most amount of time you can possibly do it. But I look from the standpoint that in the real world, I would rather you shoot somebody in time for that round to have an effect than you would back off, try to be a little more precise, and never get the opportunity to see if accuracy would have solved the problem. I don't know if that even answers the question, but it's kind of how I feel about the whole accuracy and speed thing.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely answers it. So we'll kind of shift from the theory and more go into technique. So Leatham, we had Jose write in and ask, when you draw your gun to a target, what's the first thing you look to point your gun to the target? Do you look at the front sight, both sights aligned, or what do you see when you raise your firearm up?
Well, the process is always pretty much the same. I'm looking at whatever I'm going to shoot at. I'm not a sight watcher. I'm literally not that guy that says that you focus on the front sight, focus on the front sight. It doesn't work that way for me. I work on a minimalist standpoint of see the very least that you need to see to be able to recognize whether the guns are aligned on the target. So if I was to give it you as a step-to-step, let me give it to you from the competition standpoint. I'm set up there. I'm waiting for that buzzer to go off. Sorry, Rob, I got to have the buzzer. The buzzer goes off because all that is a start to go. It would be this. It would be the same as if you stood in front of me and started stepping towards me. That's my buzzer, right? So I at that point, I'm going to draw the gun, bring the gun up, present the gun, and it's only going to come up as high and as far as it needs to in order for me to recognize I have enough alignment. And if that happens down here and you're feet away, not yards away, the gun's going to start going off because I can tell where the gun's pointed from this standpoint. My focus isn't down on the gun. My focus is still on the target. And it'll probably continue to fire as I present the gun out to what I would consider an extended, if I'm going to use an extended position. So probably what I'm going to see at the beginning is just the gun in my peripheral vision, and this all happens in fractions of a second, so it's all and it's done, so it takes way longer to explain it. And at some point, the gun will come out and be in front of me. If it gets that far, if there's a need for it, or I haven't moved on to something else. At that point, if the gun settles in front of me, it's really a basis of what kind of precision do I need for the shot to fire as to what I'm going to see next. And then my focus will probably come back down into the sights. But I don't draw the gun looking for the sights. I put the gun on the target and then start looking visually for cues that tell me where the gun's pointed.
Very good. Pincus, we have a live question. Some people prefer shooting at a target straight in front of them, while others prefer a real-life course with obstacles and multiple targets. Which do you feel is more effective in training?
I don't know that that's like I don't know that you get to prefer what you shoot at in a defensive situation. So I guess from a training standpoint, it depends on where you are. Like, where are you on the skill development, travel path, right? Like, here's the deal. I think what's most important to understand is that when you get into the part where you're going through an obstacle course or a shoot house or any of that, at that point you're starting to apply the skills that you've developed. You had to have developed them somewhere. We always, we're a fan of developing skills in context and developing skills realistically, but that doesn't mean that you get dropped off in a gunfight and if you survive, then I guess you learn something, right? So there's some reasonable way to get into that. And shooting on a target, standing in a line of people, we'll post pictures, obviously, at PDN with a bunch of guys standing in a line developing fundamental skills on hour 2 of a 2-day class, the first class they've ever taken, and somebody says, well, that's not realistic. Look at them. They're all standing in a line. Well, you got to start somewhere. You got to be able to hit that target. But here's the thing, and this is where the application comes from. When, look at what Leatham was just talking about, right? When my eyes focus on a target, and when I focus on that human shape and I zero in on the high center chest and I drive my gun to my line of sight and I learn to press that trigger smoothly and I learn to manage recoil, and that's all happening in and parallel with my line of sight, then if I, today we were doing an advanced pistol handling class, so we had guys laying on the ground. They look at the target, they reach for their gun, they get it out of the holster, they align it with their line of sight, they drive it out to full extension in and parallel with their line of sight, and it's the same thing. Right? Now you get into a shoot house and you peer around a corner and the gun's in the ready position and you see a threat, and sure, you're leaning to the side and you're putting most of your body behind that corner, behind what represents cover, and then you're driving out the gun in parallel with your line of sight the same way you were when you were standing in front of that piece of paper on a sunny day on the open range with 15 people standing to your left and right. So it's application of those fundamental skills in a more dynamic or complicated or distracting environment. That's what I think people are talking about, right? Like, I prefer to learn to apply my skills. Sure, you learn to apply them in the most dynamic, distracting environment you can, but you got to develop them somewhere.
Gotcha. For those of you that are just joining us, this is PDN Live. Topic tonight is developing defensive shooting skills with Rob Pincus and Robert Leatham. We have two Robs on tonight. Robert Leatham is a professional shooter and the USPSA national champion. If you like what you're hearing, we have a free newsletter. Sign up for it. You can find us at personaldefensenetwork.com. Twitter and Periscope, P_D_N, and on Instagram at PD Network. So, Leatham, we have another technique question. Tim writes in and says he has a tendency to limp wrist when he shoots, sometimes missing the target entirely. His long-term plan is to find a shooting instructor for private lessons, but is there anything he can do in the meantime?
Well, yeah, hold on tighter. I mean, without getting silly and adding silly answers like that, although I like silly. Let me answer the question from the standpoint that when I teach people how to shoot, I've only had 2 or 3 students ever in my career who I think hold the gun too tightly. And too tightly became a point where they caused some sort of distracting movement of the gun or a tremor, or unable to pull the trigger and operate the trigger finger rapidly, and they held on so tight that they lost any ability to move anything else. The rest of us all hold on. We don't hold on as well as we should. So when the guy says he's asking if there's something to do regarding that from the standpoint of he's missing the target, I got to tell you that that's a tip of the iceberg question, because there's probably something bigger that's a problem. And if it's gripping the gun that's causing him to miss the target, it's really not. Gripping the gun may affect how fast you can pull the trigger. It does affect how fast you can pull the trigger. It affects how quickly you can return the gun from recoil, from muzzle flip, and get it back into alignment. So if you're holding the gun poorly and the gun's moving around, you have to give up one thing. To gain one thing, you have to give up something else. The cost of speed is nearly always accuracy, and the cost of accuracy is always nearly speed. So if he's holding the gun poorly so that you can't control the gun well enough to pull the trigger quickly, then you're going to miss. So then from an analytical standpoint, we'd have to start looking for patterns of where the mistake goes. And just like Rob says, that flat range where you have one target out in front of you, and that becomes the skill building fundamentals, or maybe not fundamentals, foundation of skill is probably the right way to put it. That is where you build all those things. So what I would tell the guy is always the same thing, is if you think you're holding the gun as tight as you can, unload the gun, hold it, and have your buddy go up and grab the gun and see if he can wiggle it. Literally, if the gun's in his hand like this, if you could take the gun and move it this way in the guy's hand, he needs to hold on to it tighter. The gun kicks more than that. But once again, trying to make the descriptive a correction to something where he might be jerking, flinching, and it's not trigger jerk I'm talking about. He might be doing this. So there's a lot of things. Hard to answer.
Rob, what do you encounter teaching students with being able to grip the firearm? What are you doing with your students to improve their grip?
For me, one of the things I've kind of gotten it's the same thing. It's incredible. People don't understand, and I try to explain to them. They send me a private message email, or they put something on the Facebook or whatever, and hey, can you help me? And it's like, well, if you send me a video, maybe we can start to have a conversation, but it's really hard if you're not standing there watching what somebody's doing. And like Leatham was saying, it may be an issue that's I may see an issue that's way bigger than the thing they think is wrong. Doesn't mean it's not wrong. It's just there may be some other issue that's going to help more. So I've kind of gotten limp wrist out of the vernacular. Like, it's just not I don't know what it is. It's not a thing. It doesn't mean anything to me. Unsupported platform, yes. If you aren't providing a good, supporting, structured platform for your gun, it's not going to be reliable. It's not going to be in the right place. You're not going to be able to manage recoil well. And I look for that. Like, literally, except that there's a safety issue, I would love to start my class from like 50 yards away from a student. Like, you watch somebody 50 yards away, if their posture's off, if their elbows are bent, like, I'll be over here, you guys, my assistant instructor is going to call the commands. Like, I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to radio in the things that are wrong with you, and then I'll get 10 yards away, and I'll see something else, and then and eventually I'm going to get right up on your trigger finger and I'm going to see how your trigger press is. But honestly, like, I'd much rather look at your relationship between your shoulders and your hips first. I'd like to look at where you're, are you standing in a natural, neutral way, or are you standing in some crazy, mechanical, unrealistic human stance that was contrived or made up? I don't know. Somebody told you to stand there because they were a drill sergeant and stand like this, and you did. Except humans don't stand like that, especially when they're in a dynamic, athletic thing like a fight. So I'm looking at shoulders engaged. I'm looking at arms straight, locked in behind the gun. Obviously, we look at the way the hands interact with the gun. It's kind of the big picture, but honestly, it really does start with stuff you can see 50 yards away.
Very interesting.
I got to answer on that. Rob, that is the best explanation I think I've ever heard for it. Sorry, I'm just stepping on you there, but
do it.
when a student asks for a detailed, I need to fix a little thing. This happens all the time. Like, someone will tell me, I'm having trouble, I think I'm flinching. And says, well, your real problem is you don't hold the gun well enough to keep it pointed at the target ever, so it doesn't matter what you do with the trigger, right? And and that's all the stuff you can see, what Rob's just talking about. You can see all that from a long ways away. And when we do a class, they almost always single out. Unfortunately, it's not an arena for people who are sensitive. Because if you're doing something wrong, you know what? You and the shooter are the wrong person to see it. So this almost goes back to the first question you asked me. Should you get some training for somebody? Yeah, because they can look, if they're good and their heart is in the right place where they want to help you and not just pass on their agenda to you. Somebody standing back and looking at you and say, you can't tell what you're doing, but here's the list. And that's a great way of saying it, Rob. It starts from way back, and we end up with a microscope, but we start with a telescope.
So, Rob, you were talking about stance, and we had a question come in earlier. What are your thoughts about shooting from a fighting stance? This person practices Krav Maga, and their default is a fighting stance. And does shooting from a fighting stance create a properly supported shooting position?
You said Rob, so we don't know which one you're talking about.
Sorry. Sorry.
I think I'm Leatham and you're Rob now, Rob. I think that's how
You're the guest. That's right. I had dibs on Rob on this show.
Oh my gosh. It only took me, 40 minutes into the program to do that.
So if you're asking me, I only because I'm familiar, the CrossFit gym that I'm a co-owner with, Rob McKeeman and Aaron Genetti are my partners over there. They're both Krav instructors, and we got another Rob in the mix.
Right.
So I kind of know what they mean, what the questioner is asking about a Krav fighting stance. But the thing is, fighting stance could be a lot of different things, right? And we have to keep that in mind. So when you hear fighting stance, I don't necessarily know that everybody's hearing the same thing. If you're talking about feet basically shoulder width apart, but staggered, 1 foot in front, 1 foot behind, relatively squared off towards the threat with your shoulders in front of the hips, yeah, that can be a position. What I tell people is stance is irrelevant, right? You can be laying on the ground, you can be sitting in a car, you can be knocked down on your stomach, on your back. You could be, somebody throws you off a roof and you're going to plummet to your death, like shoot them on the way down, right? Like stance is irrelevant. So what I'm interested in is when you're training, are you training in a way that makes you think your feet have to be in a specific position? Or are you training in a way that's kind of what I call natural and neutral? And natural and neutral to me is feet about shoulder width apart, not staggered more than a foot length either way, weight forward, lowered center of gravity, shoulders in front of your hips, relatively squared off or oriented towards the threat, because that's the position a human being is likely to go into when someone's trying to kill you and you get interested in dealing with it, right? So then if you happen to have your left foot 2 feet in front of your right, cool, you're okay because it's not that deviant. But like I learned to shoot in a Weaver position, right? Because that's what I was told to do. That's what everybody was doing. That's what I did. So I learned to shoot in a bladed stance. And for years, if I put my right foot in front of my left foot and tried to shoot, it was like I was on a boat. Like, oh, no one could possibly shoot in this position. Only because I was indoctrinated myself and trained myself that when I shoot, my upper body was dependent upon that staggered stance of my lower body, and that's ridiculous. So just training in a natural, neutral way lets you accommodate all those other various positions and not be thrown way off if you aren't in your preferred stance. But I'm definitely interested in Latham's take on that.
Well, this is where this whole the Rob and Rob worlds collide thing become a problem, because we should have a different answer to that question, right? Because I come from a competition world, you come from a fighting world. So I have to now come up with an answer that says pretty much exactly the same thing. It sounds different, so that I don't sound like I'm lacking creativity, right? So that being the case, I mean, just the time we spent together on the range that one day, Rob, I think you probably understand, and I do from you too, is I don't care how you stand. Even in a competition standpoint, the only chance I get to stand exactly how I want to and set myself up in a comfortable, perfect position is before the buzzer goes off. Once the buzzer goes off, I really kind of just have to adapt to how I have to move into positions and where I'm going to shoot from. I'm shooting on the move, am I shooting moving targets, am I shooting close targets, high targets, am I leaning? So I've given up caring about what happens from about my the middle of my torso down. I don't really care. I think of that portion down has got to give me mobility, and it's got to give me lateral and forward resistance to force, i.e. the gun kicking, and being able to change balance and move around. So the bottom part of me has got to be kind of fluid, and yeah, I suppose there's if I was to stand there and think about it, I probably can give you what I consider the perfect stance for a non-moving position, but I don't care about that anymore. Because, you know, when we did the thing walking the circles, Rob, I mean, you realize you got to be able to shoot. It doesn't matter if you're in the perfect position or not. You're not going to be given the opportunity for it. Even in a competition world, I've got videos where I'm falling out of boxes and I'm on the wrong foot. I'm doing everything technically wrong, but I'm hitting all the targets and I'm doing it quickly. So, hell, what is wrong? What is right? So, I mean, to answer the question, is it an aggressive posture? Almost every time. I would say every single time it's an aggressive posture. But once again, if you look at it from a microscope up close and try to analyze one stance as being that significant to the outcome of everything, it's not. What happens from here up is what's really important to me. You know, and that's why my training, when I practice for myself, I don't care how my feet are. Matter of fact, I'll stand wrong all the time just so that I don't care anymore. I don't even know what wrong is.
So we've talked about this a little bit off air, but Leatham, how do you overcome natural adrenaline rush occurs when you step up to the line? How do you remain alert yet calm enough to recall your training?
Well, I think if the training on the flat range, on stationary targets, basic building fundamental skills is done correctly, once again, I'm not sure I can define what that is, but if it's done correctly, you will develop enough skill to be able to hit the targets you're looking at. The trick is to become so ingrained with how you operate the mechanism and fire the gun and aim the gun that you don't actually have to think about it. I think when people get confused in a competition environment, it's because they're trying to see the sights and see the targets and see their feet and see the walls and see the positions and see all the standpoints of everything that's going around you. And somewhere in the middle of it, they freak out because there's too many things to keep track of. I, being ADD, don't suffer from those problems. My mind wanders constantly. So I've made a point to not care, again, about being nervous or not. When I'm nervous in a match environment, all that means is I care about the results. If I'm not nervous, it means I really don't care. It's not important to me. And then I can't put a lot of emphasis on the results. If I am nervous, I recognize that that usually makes me faster. When I'm nervous, you'll notice I'll start talking faster. That's a personality trait that occurs for me when I shoot too. So I'll realize that while I'm seeing things, it's probably happening quicker than I think it is. So I don't have to worry one hell of a lot about hitting the targets because I'm so confident in the shooting that I can go like, well, I'm nervous, but it doesn't matter. When the sights are on the target, I can shoot the shot. And if I see the gun pointing at the target, it's good enough. So I now look forward to being nervous. Now, this sounds completely wrong from the standard that, oh, you need to learn how to control your nerves. Well, I control my nerves, but I'm still nervous and I'm still wound up because that's the process I need to learn to operate in. So I'm not trying to not be nervous. I'm trying to operate while being nervous, and all my training is based on not overcoming that, but operating within that, for somebody else's uncomfortable environment. But for me, it's not. Being uncomfortable is really not that uncomfortable.
And Rob, how would you recommend overcoming a natural adrenaline rush that occurs during defensive situation, how do you remain calm but can still recall your training?
Yeah, I think that's just it. It's exactly what Leatham just said. It's about operating in what other people would consider chaotic and overwhelming and too distracting. And that means your training model has to be that, right? And so what Leatham just described is his process of figuring out that it's the adrenaline of the competition, it's the excitement of the competition, it's the nervousness of the competition that drives him to perform better and that he's actually learned to operate well in. I think that's what you have to do with your training environment. So, you know, like Latham, when you did the figure 8 drill, right? Like that's the kind of thing we try to do even on a flat range, just to get people out of what they would consider their comfort zone and still apply their skills. And I think the word recall is a dangerous word, because recall makes it sound like you're going to take in this information, think about all the things you've learned, pick the thing you're going to do, and then try to do it. And I think that's like you're already done. Like the fight's over by then. The whole OODA loop, the whole decide and act, right? The reason that we talk about the evolution of that is it decide shouldn't even be part of the equation in a life and death instant make something happen moment. It's really about recognize. And that's why training to a stimulus response pattern is so important, right? Like when you feel a slide lock in your gun, if you think about what to do, it's too late. Like by the time you even realize you're reloading, you should be grabbing that magazine. Like that should have happened based on the feeling of the stimulus. And I always equate it to hitting the brakes in your car, right? Like when the deer jumps out in the road, you don't decide what to do. You don't recall what to do. Your foot just goes to the brake. Just like your gun should start moving in, your thumb should go to that magazine release, and your weak hand should be reaching for a magazine when you feel slide lock. Lots of people who've been in gunfights will say, well, I don't even remember drawing my gun, or they'll say, I thought I shot twice, but I was at slide lock. People who get in the car accident, they don't remember hitting their brakes necessarily, but there's 30 feet of skid marks before they hit the deer or before they hit the car that cut them off or whatever, because that just happens in an automated way because you've trained or practiced or experienced that stimulus response pattern over and over again. So I don't think it's about remaining calm. I think it's about learning to execute your complex motor skills based on the recognition of the learned stimulus in a distracting and chaotic environment, and it just happens. And that might sound, a little bit esoteric, but it really is experiential. And I think you have to put yourself into that kind of environment to have that experience, so that you can hope to perform that way, despite the fact that your adrenaline is what it is. Your natural reactions are real. You got to work with the natural reactions, not pretend you're going to be like ice in the veins, Mr. Cool, in the middle of someone trying to kill you and your mom.
Yeah, that's so good.
So I know that Leatham said that he still gets a little bit of an adrenaline rush when he steps up to line. Rob, do you still get an adrenaline rush when you step up, whether it's teaching a class or to?
Every time I'm in a gunfight, I'm like, ah! Teaching class, I don't know, like it depends on the class, I guess. Sometimes, for me, when we did that little video series, we spent the day on the range, and Leatham, jumped in. He's like, I'll do a figure 8 drill. Sure. Well, I don't know what that is. That sounds interesting. Let's try it. And I kind of know where that's going to go. And sure enough, he put me on a timer, and and he knows where that's going to go. So yeah, that you put me on a timer, I'm going to start playing games. I mean, if you want to do a competition, I'm going to think about where my left foot's going to go, and I'm going to game the crap out of that thing. I don't consider it training, but I'll game with you right there. I may not perform as well, but that's competition is competition, and I'm a guy, and there's ego, and there's all that, and that's one of the reasons that if I were to say, oh yeah, I'm going to do a season of IDPA, Clint Smith gave me some great years ago, like a decade ago now, maybe more than that, 2003 or 2004. I was hanging out with Clint and Heidi down in Texas when Thunder Ranch was still down there, and he said, you should try cowboy action shooting, because you can't take it seriously, and it's competition, and it's fun, and there's no overlap with your defensive training. Just try it. And I did a season of cowboy action shooting, and I was, like, I didn't have all the clothes. They wanted me to wear a hat. Like, you have to have a code name, and you have to have a hat. I'm like, show me in the rule book. And sure enough, you have to have a code name, but you don't have to have a hat.
What's your code name?
No Hat Rob. So that was my cowboy name. No Hat Rob. So I it was fun, you know, but I took it seriously. I was like mad when I'd miss, or I was mad if the guy was faster than me. But at the same time, there was clearly no overlap on, you know, the class I was running for SF that next week or whatever when I'm goofing around with cowboy action shooting on Sunday, and that was fun for me. But it was still very competitive. When it gets to be too much overlap between it kind of looks like defensive shooting, like IDPA, but it's not. That's where, you know, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to try to win, but I'm going to do it with setting a bad example for my students. And then at the same time, if I do it my way, I'm going to come in like 79th out of 80 because one guy's gun broke and he just got kicked out. And then somebody's going to be like, I'm not going to train with that guy because he came in 79th. And so it's just frustrating. But yeah, so yes, adrenaline, put me on a timer. I'm going to try to get a fast time and probably somehow cheat what I actually would want to do if I were practicing for defensive shooting, and it hurts my soul.
Yeah, but I think that's good for you, dude. I think it's good for you to get out. You're talking about getting out of your comfort zone and putting yourself in a position that's stressful. I imagine stepping in front of a group of people doing something you really don't want to do because you truly believe in it being wrong. That's got to be as stressful a situation as you can be put in.
Thanks. And we put it on video.
Yeah, now let's video and show everybody.
Oh my gosh. So you, Leatham, you mentioned, and Rob Pincus, you mentioned the figure 8 drill. So Leatham, what is the figure 8 drill?
Well, that's where Rob sets up a drill for me to fail on, and me being dumb enough to fall into this thing. So I mean, it's his drill. It's not stealing from him. But you basically are walking circles around a figure 8 between a couple cones. Is that right, Rob? That we use cones on that one? Yeah. And there were a number of targets on the range. Is it okay to tell the whole details, Rob?
Yeah, I think it's out there. We put a lot of videos up at PDN. Sure.
Okay, so and there are things.
I haven't heard you describe it. I haven't heard you describe it since that day. So this is
okay. So here's what happened. Hold my beer. So there are things written on the targets, and there's one emblem. You know, I can't help but be the person I am, which is to cheat as much as possible, to try to improve the score. So I'm looking at this symbol written on this target, and I can't get my mind away from everything else I can recognize, but that symbol. I found out later what he thought it was, only I don't think it wasn't a very good, let's say his artistic skills weren't as good as his creativity as far as the drill goes. And so you're walking around, and he says, you know, what happens is you're just going to shoot, and you know, you've got magazines, and you do your thing and shoot and shoot and shoot. And it's a setup to show so for Pincus to show how stupid Rob is. And it worked just as planned. So he gives me, you know, like say there's a number 7 on the target, and you say, walk, 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 7. You have to locate which target had 7 on it, and I shot the target a bunch of times. And then, so my mind is now set as, okay, he's going to tell me what to shoot, and I'm just going to shoot that thing. And I'm like, okay, well, this is easy, because I can read, mostly. And then I'm walking this thing, and he's, how did you say it, Rob? Do you remember? It was 8.
I don't know. I think the
4 from 8. I think you said it as 4 from 8.
Yeah,
was it?
Half of 8 or
half of 8. You didn't say 8 minus 4. You didn't give me a simple equation that I was ready to operate on. You said
algebra. You can find, but a word problem.
Yeah, I was ready for something big, and he says half of 8, and I'm like, half of 8. What's a half of 8? I don't even know what a half of 8. That symbol must be a half of 8. So I shot that target 4 or 5 times after seconds of delay trying to figure out what to do. And I'm sure we got video of all this. And then I sit there and go, half of 8. I look back and say, what's half of 8? I'm like, oh yeah, 4. And then I shoot the 4 target because my brain didn't process what it was looking for. So I'm in a fight. I'm looking for a set of stimulus, and I'm looking for opportunity. I'm looking for recognize things are going, but I'm so not thinking about doing a very complicated math sequence, which was half of 8. And then I shot the number 4 target. Of course, so that means in the meantime, I killed Mommy because I shot the wrong target, and I didn't survive anyway because half of 8 standing over here has obviously shot me while I'm shooting the wrong guy. So the good news is, like you said, we do have it on video for the world to see.
And we would talk about my performance on a timer, but I think we're going to be revealing that relatively soon at the Springfield website, so everyone will get to see that.
Yeah. Spoiler alert! Yeah.
So we're getting almost to the top of the hour. I just want to squeeze in a couple more questions. We've had a lot of live questions that we won't be able to get around to, but as per usual, Rob will be sticking around. Both Robs, Rob 1, Rob 2, will be sticking around afterwards to answer some questions online. So before we sign off, though, 2 questions. So the first one is, Leatham, what do you think the merits are of using dry fire for practice, if any?
Well, the merits are that you can do it not anywhere, but it's easy to take away the distraction of the gun firing to learn some techniques. You can't learn how to aim the gun, or so you can't learn how to hold the gun properly because that's based on recoil. But you can learn fundamentally how to draw. You can learn how to reload. You can learn how to move. You can learn a lot of the fundamental techniques. So when you get to a live fire range, you're not there learning how to draw. You can get that down without shooting. But once again, to really see how well you're doing it, you do need the addition of the gun firing, so you see the results of what's shot. But as far as just basic mechanicals, you can learn almost all of that from dry firing.
And Rob, Rob Pincus, are there any sort of specific drills that people should be doing for dry firing to improve their defensive shooting skills?
You know, I'm a big fan of, if you want to learn how to shoot, you should probably shoot. The gun should go bang, especially to establish skills, recoil management, things like reloading. So maybe that's something we finally disagreed. It's 9:56 in the East Coast, and we disagree about something. The problem with, so like I got a cert pistol here, right? So I can learn how to insert this magazine and pretend to rack the slide all day long. But without the stimulus of slide lock to initiate that process, I don't know that I can necessarily apply that mechanical skill of inserting the magazine and racking when I need it. And I think that's the missing link. So many people will take this pistol and do that and just drop the magazine, insert it, drop the magazine, insert it, drop the magazine, insert it. Well, all you're doing is taking a magazine and putting it in your hand. It's proprioception. It's easy to do. You put it in the ready position. The gun, that's the easy part. The hard part is applying it and learning when to apply it. So that kind of thing I think you need live fire for. Now, on the other hand, what I can do with this, like a million times all day long, is put it in my holster. Maybe I'm seated. Maybe I want to learn to present in my car, in the garage. I can do that really safely with this, whereas sitting in a car and unholstering and reholstering your real gun, even if you've cleared it, all that stuff, there's always that danger moment with a real gun. The accidents always happen with the unloaded gun, right? Photons, like this isn't gonna like hurt, right? So this thing is really valuable. Put a banana in your pocket, right? Like a blue gun, whatever. Put something in your holster and learn to present in an unorthodox position. Get the reps, get the practice, moving around with the gun in your hand, getting used to keeping in the ready position. All of that kind of stuff is great for what I would consider like a non-gun training. So dry fire, I don't know how much value you really get pulling the trigger, but I know you can do a lot of cool things with a cert pistol, with a blue gun, with any laser trainer that will help you to learn to apply those fundamental shooting skills that you develop on the range with actual bullets and bang bang sounds when you're really learning to shoot. And then getting the gun into action, getting the gun into the position, getting the gun into an unorthodox shooting upside down, lying on the ground, whatever it is, doing that dry fire all day long, every day.
I got a T-shirt, Rob.
I got a T-shirt, Rob.
That you probably like, and it says my favorite dry fire range with the gun loaded.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's so many. I grew up being told 1,000 drive trigger presses for every one live. That kind of thing, and I don't get it. I don't think it's valuable. I think if I'm going to do bullseye shooting and one-handed shooting 2-inch groups at 25 yards with my 1911. Yeah, I guess, put the dime on the front sight kind of thing, but not for defensive shooting.
So, Pincus, you get a pass on this question since you answered it before. But, Leatham, you are on the hot seat. Everyone wants to know, what is your carry rig of choice?
What gun?
Yeah, gun, holster, setup. What's your setup?
Starland 018 is my inside the pants holster with almost always an XDS. And I have 9s and 45s, and it all depends on whether I feel manly that day. I'm old school and I like the big bullets, so I almost always choose the 45 over the 9, but I recognize that that's a personal decision. And being in Arizona all the time, we quite commonly carry, what did we term it? The term for it was, Rob, where it's not really discreetly concealed, but you just don't, it's there if you look for it. I'm one of those carriers too, because nobody.
Yeah, we'd have a term for that, but I've forgotten it.
Polite
was
it like polite concealment or something like that? I don't remember what it was.
I don't know. 1007.
Yeah, you can see the gun sticking out if you look hard enough. But and then half the time, I don't care if the gun's concealed or not. But if the gun is almost always an XDS. That just has been proven to be my favorite of all the carry guns.
Awesome. Well, I think tonight has been a really good discussion. We kicked it off with When Worlds Collide, but found out that they really don't collide, not until about almost an hour in. But great conversation tonight. The topic was developing defensive shooting skills with our special guest, Robert Leatham, professional shooter. And Pincus, thank you for joining us. You're in Florida now. Where will you be this next upcoming month?
So finishing up, I got some classes in Pensacola, Western Florida, up in the Panhandle. Then I'm going to Georgia, Taylorsville, about an hour outside of Atlanta. I know there's still some slots there. Then North Carolina, then New Jersey, New York, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, out through the Midwest. PersonalDefenseNetwork.com. Hit the training tab and take a look at the dates and locations. And it's not just me. Remember, we have 10 instructors on the tour this year. So you got Caleb Causey doing medical stuff. You got Chris Fry, Mike Seeklanders doing obviously a lot of pistol stuff also. So we've got a lot of great instructors. Take a look at what we've got on the schedule.
Awesome. And Robert Leatham, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you?
Well, next week I go back to Springfield Armor. We talk about all the new products for the next upcoming year or two. Then very soon we have the single stack and revolver nationals, and then a race show, Yankee Cup. The whole year is the circus starts.
Awesome. And you've got a website?
I do, roblatham.com.
Awesome. And if those of you that are watching and like what you see, we've got a free newsletter. Check it out on PersonalDefenseNetwork.com. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Periscope, P_D_N, and on Instagram at PD Network. Thank you all, and we'll see you next month, and have a good night.